Hi everyone, welcome to a very special episode of the Property Finance Podcast. Today is the 100th episode of the podcast, and we're going to turn the tables a little bit today. And Adam Powell is joining me. He's actually going to be interviewing me for the podcast today. So, Adam, turn the tables.
You said interview. I was going to interrogate you, actually.
Yeah, that's fine. Either one is fine.
I guess, we when I first joined the company, we did a chat about how I got into the industry. So it's nice to actually turn the tables on you. So I'm going to ask you exactly the same question you asked me initially, which was,
right.
How did you get into the industry? And when did you start?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. So about 8 years ago, it would have been 8 years ago, I was conveyancing. So I'd been conveyancing for probably about 4 years at that point. So from the age of 18 to 22. And then went into work one day at the age of 22, expecting a baby, and got told that we'd all been made redundant. Literally walked into work on a Monday morning, had a really nice weekend. And yeah, the Friday we'd hit all of the targets that we were meant to hit, blah, blah, blah. Just really out of the blue, got dragged in. Right, that's it. Company's done. You're all being made redundant. So yeah, kind of panicked a lot to begin with, and then found a recruitment agency, literally I think in the car on the way home, because it was about an hour and a half drive home, literally ringing every recruitment agency I could think of. I need to find something, expecting a baby in, I think 3 months at that point. So yeah, sort of 6 months pregnant, and just like, I need to find something. And yeah, recruitment agency came back and said, we've got a sales position and it's in business finance. And I said, right, okay, never done business finance before, got no idea what I'm doing. But I'll go and talk to the guys and see what they do. Went for the interview and got chatting, and they mentioned that they'd done a couple of property development deals, like raised finance. I think it was 3 deals at that point. And we got talking, and obviously all of my experience up to that point had been conveyancing, estate agency, all that kind of thing. So it'd all been in property, commercial property as well. And kind of got talking about that. And yeah, just at the end of the interview, we're kind of like, well, actually, rather than business finance, let's do some property finance. And I was like, well, I know nothing about property finance, don't know anything about development finance, don't know anything about bridging finance. Literally, this interview had been the first time I'd ever heard of property development finance. So got started in the August. And yeah, a year and a half later, had built up quite a good social media following, had done quite a number of deals, had helped a lot of property developers raise finance, had got in with a lot of the property education companies and that kind of thing. And yeah, just a year and a half in, kind of saw an opportunity to get into property development myself. That didn't kind of work out at that point. I was 24 and expecting a second baby. So, well, I wasn't expecting a second baby, although I looked like I probably was. But second child on the way. And again, kind of saw an opportunity to move on, do something different, and thought, I'll get into property development. That didn't work out. So yeah, at the age of 24, sat at the kitchen table, going, right, what do I do? Sort of that business had failed. And it was like, well, I know property finance. The last 18 months had kind of proved that I was good at property finance. So yeah, the property finance guy was literally born at a kitchen table in November 2018.
So you were focusing purely on development and bridging. Did you do mortgages as well, or was that something that came later?
That's kind of come recently, I would say, is the mortgage side. So when I sort of did the 18 months of being employed in property finance, we weren't FCA regulated, same as sort of what we do now. So mortgages were sort of few and far between. So we did a couple of commercial term products, but yeah, nothing major. So it was very development and bridging focused, and that's what kind of sparked my love for development and bridging finance, and what kind of led to the Property Finance Guy and the Property Finance Collective being very development and bridging orientated.
So you sort of got into the industry eight years ago.
Yeah.
So what sort of changes have you seen since then in the industry?
A lot, to be fair. So if I go back 6 years, so when I first started the Property Finance Guy at 24, I was probably, well, I think I was the youngest owner of a commercial finance brokerage at that point by some distance. I mean, 6 years ago, the industry was incredibly male dominated, and dominated by a lot of men with white hair. I mean, it was...
Or no hair.
or no hair in your case. Yeah, it was very, very heavily male dominated. And over the last 6 years, especially over the last 2 or 3 years, there's been a real push for women in finance, which I've always been a massive advocate for. And we've always employed, as the Property Finance Collective, heavily on the female side of things. So we've always tried our best to bring more women into the industry. And even now, as the collective, we are exactly 50-50. So there's 50% men, 50% women. And yeah, that's been one of the biggest changes I've seen is more women being brought into the industry, which is great. And also the age of people coming into the industry has come down a bit. And I like to think to a degree that I've been responsible to that, very small part responsible for that. And kind of people have seen that actually, there you go, here's someone who's come in at 24, has helped kind of make it look a bit more exciting and a bit sexier, I think. And yeah, hopefully that's led to a few younger people wanting to come in, because there really was, six to 8 years ago, there really was a risk when you looked around at the industry that it was getting to the brink of extinction, because there was coming a real point of where is the next generation coming from? And I think that's one of the biggest changes I've seen, especially in the bridging and development space, for sure.
Mm. And obviously, we've over the last couple of years, we've seen rate increases. 14 consecutive rate increases from late 2022 through to 2023. Have you seen that impact on what we do on a day-to-day basis?
To a degree, not massively, because a lot of what we do is based around a lot of family offices, a lot of private lenders. So the actual rate increases on development and bridging haven't been as severe as what we've seen on the buy-to-let side. I mean, we went from, I think at one point, placing mortgages at 2.99% fixed for 5 years with like a 2% arrangement fee, to now we're lucky if we get below 5%. And to see that happen in such a short period of time did wipe out that side of the business to a degree, that kind of commercial mortgage and buy-to-let side. But predominantly our main business has always been development and bridging, which has remained relatively untouched. I think the biggest impact that we've seen actually hasn't directly come from arranging the finance, but actually has come from developers exiting from those products. And I think that's one of the big impacts that it's had, is actually a lot of the developers that we raised finance for 18 months, 2 years, 2.5 years ago, whatever, are now coming to the end of their schemes. And actually what was a very profitable scheme, a very easy to exit scheme, they're now far more complicated. Their audience is much slimmer. They've got a real problem, potentially, some of them, on their hands in terms of actually getting out of this. And thank goodness the rates are starting to come down again, because it's probably perfect timing for a few of them. But I think that's where we've seen the impact. But business levels haven't really dropped. We're still getting as many developers now as we did over the last 18 months, over the last 3 years. If anything, actually now we're probably the busiest we've ever been. And there hasn't been that much of a drop in interest rates. There's only been 0.25% drop at the point of recording this. So we've gone from 5.25 to 5. So I think, yeah, we're at a point now where everyone's kind of ridden the storm and they've kind of got used to the new norm.
So you think that they recalibrated to a certain extent?
I think so. I think we were saying about this on the train up today, weren't we? Everyone's been used to 0.1% as kind of the base rate for so long, and those low base rates for so long, that we've been spoiled over the last 8 to 10 years, 15 years, however long it's been. It's now getting to a point where people have got to readjust to this being the new norm, I think, at least for the next couple of years. So, I mean, that 5% may get down to 2.5%, 3%. I'm not an economist, so I can't predict where it's going to end up, but it may get down to that 2.5%, 3%. But even still, that is significantly higher than 0.1%. So I think people have had to make a big adjustment, and it will filter through. Landowners are becoming a bit more aware that what was worth this at 0.1% is now worth this at 5%, because of obviously the ongoing issues with people getting mortgages, finance, etc., finance costs increasing. It's obviously having a knock-on effect for landowners, etc., and the price that they're achieving for some of their properties. But yeah, everyone's had that big readjustment period, I think.
Yeah.
And having been through COVID, Liz Truss, everything else, there comes a point where you just go, we can't wait for the next thing. We've got to make a move, because people have waited 2 years for COVID. They've then waited another 2 or 3 years for obviously the economy to go through what it's going through, there has to come a point where you go, I've just got to get on with it. And I think that's what a lot of people have hit now, is that point of, I've just got to get on with it. Because I've just waited so long, nothing's going to get better to that degree. It's just, you've got to do it now, or yeah.
And I think there's always opportunities, even when the market's on a slight downturn, for example.
Of course there are.
There are always going to be opportunities. The sorts of cases that you've dealt with in the last 8 years or so, is there one that stands out as your favourite?
Yeah, probably one that I've spoken about a lot, actually, which is one that we completed on fairly recently. So it was April last year, I think. So it was a deferred payment scheme. So it's for 13 houses. The developer the developer was introduced by the vendor. I know both of them in different formats, but they kind of all came together. We all sat at the table, and the vendor wanted 2.3 million for this plot of land. And for these 13 houses, planning was actually granted for 14, but they wanted to retain one of the units. So it was for the remaining 13. We want 2.3 million for it. And I went in and I said, well, okay, what about taking 1.3 million up front and then taking 1.15 million at the back end, so in 18 months' time? And the reason for the 1.15 was because there was obviously 10% interest for 18 months on that £1 million, hence the 150 grand. And that all got agreed. And then we went for development finance. And obviously we were looking to raise as much of the 1.3 million as we could up front. And I actually managed to somehow, still not quite sure how, managed to raise 1.5 million net day one. So the clients actually ended up with, after they paid stamp duty, everything else, ended up with 66 grand liquid on day one. So for me, that was a really good one, because it meant that a bit of a unicorn deal, whether we'll ever pull anything like that off again. But you've got a developer who hasn't had to put any money in for the deposit. They've actually ended up with 60 grand in the bank day one as well to help get, obviously, the build going. Just as an overall deal, was just a really, really nice one. And we got it at a good interest rate. I think it was 8.7% per annum as well. Brilliant. Which for a deferred payment one, you'd expect 12, 13%. So we've got a good interest rate over 18 months. They had plenty of time to complete the deal. And yeah, just overall, just like deal structure as well, just getting in there, being able to negotiate and being responsible for negotiating every aspect of the deal as well. Because it's very rare that, whilst we try and get involved with actually structuring the deal, it's very rare that we can actually sit in a room and go, right, this is how we think it should be structured, and actually putting all elements of the deal together. So for me, it was just the perfect deal. Ticked all the boxes.
I can't just ask you that question without asking, what's the most problematic deal you've come across?
Yeah, so there's...
And certainly how you dealt with it.
Yeah, so in terms of problematic deals, I mean, it's probably actually to an element the same deal. So it's coming to a point now where the guys have completed the properties, they're Wind and Water. Sorry, not Wind and Water, practical completion rather, I should say. But there's been delays on utilities, etc. The development finance is now coming to an end, so the 18 months is now nearly up. Utilities are at the point of recording this, 26 days behind where they should be. So in terms of the actual finance isn't problematic, but it's actually the development itself has become problematic, because we're now in a position where we've got to try and refinance that deal as quickly as possible to get them out of the development finance that they're now stuck in. That's now coming to an end, that's going to cause problems obviously there. You've got to try and refinance whilst the utilities aren't in as well, which causes a problem because practical completion can't be signed off until the utilities are in. So we're in a position now where we have found a solution. There's a 75% bridge that we're going on to. It should release some equity for the clients. I think they'll release about 200 grand. So they'll release that 200 grand. It will buy them another 12 months, which they can then get the utilities in, get the sales agreed. But again, that's another knock on, is because the units are so large, we've also got the worry of, are the units going to sell in time? Because I mean, they're 850 grand houses. So on the right hand side, you've got 5 units. On the left hand side, you've got 8. So a couple of the 8 have gone, one of the 5's gone, but there needs to be some serious movement on that. And again, that causes a bit of a worry for some of the lenders, because they want to see that there's been some traction. And obviously those units have been built since April last year. So what are we at now? 14 months, probably since they've started. When we're going for the dev exit stuff, the lenders are saying, well, how many sales are there? And I'm saying, well, there's 3 out of 13. It's not a huge percentage. So getting a lender on board to go, right, we'll buy into it for another 12 months is quite difficult. So that has been problematic. And I mean, there's been numerous problematic deals that we've kind of helped out with. I would say the biggest kind of issue that we come across is exactly that. People coming to the end of their terms and then struggling and trying to find a refinance route out of that. So yeah, we've had a lot of emergency refinances that we kind of had to deal with, especially over the last 2 years, where people have struggled to sell or refinance in time. So yeah, that's probably the most problematic thing I've come across.
Over the years, you've also got heavily involved on the training circuit, various networks inviting you over to train some of the people that they brought in, whether it's certain specific courses, etc. How do you see the training world as it's been panning out at the moment?
Yeah, so as it sits at the minute, I've spoken about this a few times recently, kind of my disillusionment, I guess, with the training world, in that there are a lot of education providers out there, and every single day there seems to be another training company being born out of somewhere. There are some very, very good providers, some incredibly good providers, and I've had the privilege of working with some of the best in the industry. But I've also had, how to put this nicely, I've also worked with some pretty bad ones, and you only realise they're bad when you kind of get in and see it happening for yourself. So there are ones where I've gone along and I've delivered a talk, and I might arrive a bit early and I'll catch the talk before that's provided by the trainer, for example, and I'll sit and listen, and you sort of sit there and you pick up on things, and they'll be talking through things, and it's all very, the bad ones are all very, get into this, you don't need the experience, it's all going to be amazing, it's all going to work out, there's no risk, don't worry about it, just keep buying into the course and everything else. The good ones tend to have more of an approach to risk. They tend to be more risk adverse to things. So they tend to stand and say, well, actually, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. You need to think about X, Y, Z. There's all of these different things that can go wrong. And I think that's the difference between a good and a bad educator, is the bad ones will tell you it's all going to be good, all going to be sunshine and roses, and you're all going to be absolutely fine. You'll make huge profits, no problem at all. The good ones tend to tell you the truth, and that actually it's not all that good. But I think without a shadow of a doubt, there needs to be some regulation to the training market, because the amount of piss poor education that is out there is just getting quite scary now. There is so much false information out there. There is so much nonsense out there that you see, that there's got to be some regulation. There's got to be something that holds the trainers accountable, because at the minute there's nothing that holds a trainer accountable. So they can fill your head with all of this stuff, and then they can just claim, oh, well, we told you to do this and you didn't do it. We told you to do this, you didn't do it. And just kind of step back from it and be like, oh, I don't need to be responsible for anything. And I've seen it recently as well, where mentees are investing in their mentors. So not just buying the courses, but they're actually investing in their mentors. So they're giving them 100, 200 grand, 300 grand, whatever. And again, there needs to be some regulation to that, because to me, it feels wrong to, I'm trying to think of, so the problem is you can't think of anything similar. You try and think of, oh, well, you wouldn't do this in this industry, but there literally isn't anything similar to this industry. There's nothing like it. And it's bizarre having someone pay for a course, then having you on stage as the trainer, pedestalizing yourself as this great being of infinite wisdom, and then taking investment as well from people who are, and I mean this in the nicest way, but most people who are buying into training courses tend to be of a certain level. They're quite naive on certain things. Yep. And even though they've got 300, 400, 500 grand in the bank, they're still naive to that thing. Hence why they're getting education on it, because they're naive to that side of the industry. And I think...
So you think it's pretty misleading then?
Oh God, without a shadow of a doubt. There's so much misleading information. And I think, yeah, there's got to be some regulation on it. And I could talk about the education sector for hours, but there's got to be some regulation on it sooner rather than later, because otherwise we're going to end up in a situation where it's just it's almost normalized now for mentors to take money off mentees and then lose it. And the fact we're in a world where that is normal makes no sense to me whatsoever.
So you talk about sort of changes in the training world. If we go and just focus on the industry itself, the bridging and development market and the industry itself, are there any changes you'd like to see in there?
One of the biggest ones I think I want to see is maybe a bit more respect from lenders towards smaller brokers. That's something I would really like to see, because I think there tends to be, and this comes from as well, being so young in the industry. I don't command the same respect that someone who's been in. I mean, there are people who have literally been in the industry for longer than I've been alive, yourself included.
I was waiting for that one.
Yeah, I thought I'd throw that in there. But there are people who have been in this industry for longer than I've been alive. And I think the problem you have is that most of those people are running lenders. And the problem that I have is, as a 30-year-old, I don't command that respect necessarily from some of the lenders to give them a kick up the backside to say, you need to deal with this ASAP. Don't get me wrong, there are some lenders, the majority of the ones that we deal with and who get the majority of our business, who do give us that respect and who do sort of prioritize our cases and do who we can have a certain sway with. But there are some that you just, for some reason, cannot accept that there are younger people coming to. And same with, and I probably get told off for saying this, but oh well, the same lenders also have a lack of respect for women in the industry. And it seems to be that thing of they're scared of change. There are more women coming into the industry. There are more younger people coming into the industry. They need to be aware of that, and they need to accept that that is where the industry is going.
Do you think that's more of a cultural thing within the actual
without a shadow of
institutions
doubt.
themselves?
I mean, the lack of invites to some events that I get, it baffles me. You think, I see these pictures on LinkedIn of these events where it is just like, what's the best way of describing it? Just these cliques that you just can't get into. Not that I necessarily want to be in there, but yeah, you see these pictures on LinkedIn of all of these bridging and development lenders who are together, and it's there's not a young man between them. And I think that's what needs to change. Is there needs to be, and don't get me wrong, there are lenders who are really, really pushing for that. There are some young guys who've taken over some development and bridging lenders. There's quite a few actually now that have been taken over by younger guys, and they really are pushing for that to happen.
So they're looking for new blood.
That's it. And I think, like I said, they're the ones who get the majority of our business. But I think there needs to be a cultural shift sooner rather than later to start accepting that that's happening.
Okay. I tend to agree with that. Let's go back to you and the actual business itself. You've run your own business now for a number of years. What would you say is the sort of biggest lessons that you've learned during that time? Yeah,
so there's two, I think, that I've learned. Two major ones. Actually, three. So the first one is what we've just spoken about, which is that you're not going to be liked by everyone. Not everyone is going to want to be your best mate. Not everyone is going to want to be there to help you, et cetera, et cetera. No matter how you portray yourself in the business, no matter how you portray yourself in the industry, you're never going to be liked by everyone. And that's something that took a long time for me to get my head around. Still do have to kind of get my head around it, because I've never said a bad word about anyone other than where I've just slagged off a load of lenders. But you know what I mean? I would never pick on a certain individual. There's no one who I've got an individual issue with. But I know there's a lot of people who, given age, etc., have got issues with me. And I've seen posts on LinkedIn of women who've come into finance and who've said the same thing. So that's the first thing, is that not everyone's going to be your friend. Not everyone's going to have your best interests at heart, everything else. And no matter what you put out into the world, you're not going to get the same back. It's just as simple as that. The second one is due diligence, and that is a big one for me. I've made some investments into people. I've made some investments into businesses, and especially the investments that I've made into businesses, I think I probably should have just taken a breath maybe and just gone, is this the right thing? And one in particular that I invested about 35 grand into. I will never see that money ever again. The business went really well, but then it just completely collapsed out of nowhere. And I don't think any amount of due diligence necessarily could have stopped that from happening. But I think it comes back to that first point of saying about no matter what you put out into the world, you're not going to get the same back. It's the second lesson almost is look after yourself. And I think that's something that I've never necessarily been very good at, which is just look after myself, just look after my own business, stop trying to help everyone else. As brokers, our job is literally to help people on a day-to-day basis. But that can go almost too far. And I think that's where that lesson comes in is look after myself. Just remember that, yeah, not everyone needs that level of help. And then I think probably the third one is not to grow too quickly. So we went through a period just before COVID. We grew really, really quickly. We had, I think, 12, 13 of us in total. Got to a really good size, had the offices, had everything, did all of this stuff, got really, really big, really, really well known, et cetera, had a really good social media presence. And then out of nowhere, COVID hits. Didn't really do anything to the business in terms of it didn't put us in a precarious position, or it didn't kind of, I mean, obviously we're still here 4 years later. But what it did do is it made me realize that actually we're now a team of 4 and we're probably 10 times more profitable now than we were back then. So we've got a third of the people, but we're a hell of a lot more profitable. And I think that was a big lesson for me is that, and obviously you've owned your own brokerage as well many moons ago and had the same thing. And it was kind of, you've given me that advice again and again and again of just stick with the 4 of us. We don't need anyone else. If we get to a point where we need someone else, great, we'll look at it. But actually, we don't need to go through that growth because the 4 of us can deal with a hell of a lot of business. There's a hell of a lot we can do. So yeah, that was probably lesson number 3 was just stick to a certain size, keep it profitable. That's all we need to worry about. And that's why we're here after 6 years.
Yeah.
Because for the last 2.5 years, we've been, I think it's 2.5 years, have just been the 4 of us. And it's been great. It's worked really, really well. And yeah, we can cope with the levels that we're at.
Would you say that obviously when the company grew that quickly and you took on that staff, in an ideal world, COVID would never have happened.
Yeah.
And you continued that upward curve. Would you say that was your biggest mistake in business when you recruited that many people?
I'd definitely say it's up there. Because for me, I think whilst it hasn't affected where the business is today, we're still in a great position. We're still existing. We've still got a great pipeline of business, et cetera, et cetera. I think what it would have done is it would have built up a bit of a war chest, and we could have maybe invested in some other things. We could have done some other things. We could have invested in certain technologies, et cetera. It would have just, I mean, our wage bill at one point was pretty ridiculous. It was getting up to 20, 30 grand a month. And I look at us now and we've got that right down. We're about a third of that now. And you think in terms of overheads, we're at a really nice overhead now. And it just makes it, we ran that for probably 9 months at that level. I mean, if you do 9 months at 30 grand compared to where we are now, it's about 150 grand that could have been saved.
Hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it?
Hindsight is a wonderful thing. It really is. And yeah, but I wouldn't change it. So although it's my biggest mistake, I wouldn't change it because without that, we wouldn't be where we are now.
And biggest success that you've taken out of running a business, as far as that's concerned, your biggest success, you think?
Yeah, so I think one of our biggest is probably the presence that we've got. So in terms of the social media, the podcast, everything else, the audience that we've created, I think is probably, I never in a million years, when I was at school, I was probably the shyest kid going, and
Hard to believe.
I know. Well, it is. It's mad, really. And then in conveyancing, again, very kind of placid, laid back. Never would have dreamt of public speaking or being on video or whatever. So to kind of break through those barriers and then create the presence that we've created, the audience we've created, everything else, I think that for me is my own biggest personal success. And then in terms of the business, I think the fact we've been going for 6 years, that for me is, again, if I'd have been told when I sat there at that kitchen table in 2018 that this was still going to be going 6 years later, I'd have thought you were mental. Because genuinely, I at that point, it took us 2 months, I think, to complete our first deal. So for, I think it was the end of December. So I think we started on the 3rd of November, I think it was, 18th of November, that was it. And then we completed our first deal just before Christmas. So actually it was only a month. And yeah, it's been going ever since. And I never, ever, ever would have imagined that.
Well, when you look at the sort of the amount of brokerages that are out there at the moment, and there are a lot.
About 66,000, I think. Yeah,
there are an awful lot.
It's ridiculous.
What sets the Property Finance Collective apart from a lot of them?
So I think the biggest thing that sets us apart is we niched into first-time developers and creative finance. So creative finance has always been the big thing for us. We've always looked at deals how no one else looks at deals. We've always structured deals how no one else structures deals. And we've always been able to find a solution for most things that people present to us. There's not many deals where we can't find a solution. In fact, actually, the ones where we can't find a solution tend to be the vanilla ones where there just isn't any room for creativity. So I think that's the biggest thing that sets us apart, is that we just make it creative. And I think the team that we've got in place as well is, I mean, there's me who's come from a sort of estate agency conveyancing background, and I think that's benefited because I've come into the industry with no preconceptions. Nobody said, and it's always that thing of, if someone doesn't tell you that something's impossible, you'll find a way of doing it. And that's the thing. I came into the industry, no one told me this is how you do it. No one told me you can't do it like this. So I've kind of come in and gone, well, this is how I'm going to do it. And then everyone else has sort of gone, oh, well, you can't do it that way. Well, I'm already doing it that way. It's already happening. It's already done. And I think that's led to a lot more people kind of opening their eyes to the creative stuff. And then obviously there's yourself, who's been in the industry for a couple of years, a while. You've got that experience. You've done it yourself. You've run a brokerage. You've been at a lender. You've been at numerous lenders, and have had that development finance experience from a lender's perspective. Then we've got Ali, who's come into the team. She's an ex-nursery nurse. She's used to dealing with kids, so she's perfect when working with lenders, underwriters, solicitors, etc., because she just gives them a kick up the arse and gets them going. And I think we're not your normal team. We're not 20 years at HSBC and then have all of a sudden gone into brokering. We are a whole mess of stuff come together, which has just created this really good company, which we can be creative because we don't have those boxes that other people have when they first get into the industry. So I think that's what sets us apart.
I would tend to agree with that. I think the mixed level of experience that we have within the team, certainly that when I joined the team, there was a certain skill set that you have that I don't.
Yeah.
Part of it,
and there's a skill set that you've got that I don't have.
Yeah, that comes with age. But I've certainly found it's complemented very, very well indeed, especially when you're dealing with lenders or a variety of clients.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've got one final question, actually, which is sort of the important factors to remember on two things. One, clients. Two, lenders.
Yeah.
What are the key important things to sort of remember when dealing with both?
Yeah, so I think the big thing when dealing with lenders especially, I'm going to answer these backwards. So I'm going to talk about the things to remember when dealing with the lender that the client needs to remember. So for us, I think something that is worth keeping in mind as a client when you go to a broker is that the lenders aren't guaranteed to lend you that money. They're under no obligation to lend you the money. There's nothing there that says if you go to a lender, they're going to lend you the money. It doesn't work like that. We have to convince them to lend you that money. And then even then, you've got to keep convincing them the whole way until you get that money. And I think a lot of clients forget that. Sometimes we get clients who come to us who believe they have some God-given right to that money. That lender has to give me that money. No, they don't. They really don't. And as a broker, we will do everything in our power to persuade them to give you that money. But there are some things that are just out of our control. If a lender's underwriting team decides they don't like the project, they're not going to lend you the money. If the credit team finds something that they don't like, they're not going to give you the money. If the solicitor finds something they don't like, they're not going to give you the money. If anything stops them having 100% confidence in that deal, they're not going to give you the money. And they can just pull out at any time with no reason whatsoever. And as a broker, that is horrific. And people always say to us, why am I paying broker fees? What are you doing as the broker? There is so much unseen stuff. There's so much that we do that a client never sees. There's so much that we do that a lender never sees. And I think there needs to be more respect for that position of the broker, of actually, we're not just there gathering your information and then hitting forward on it. A lot of the time we are organizing that information in a way that actually the lender can make sense of it, or the lender understands it. Nothing's going to upset the lender or freak them out or anything like that. So that we are there as a filter between client and lender to make sure that nothing wavers their confidence in that deal, but also making sure you as the client don't say anything stupid or don't do anything stupid, which then brings that deal down. And then similarly, from the client's perspective, the lenders need to kind of understand that there is a client there is a human being there. And I think sometimes there's too much of a disconnect between the two, in that a lot of lenders they go, oh no, we don't want to do the deal anymore, or can you give us this info, whatever it may be. And you sometimes have to go back and say, there is a human being here who is in the midst of a deal, or is maybe in an emergency situation if their existing debt is coming to an end, or whatever it may be, or if we're trying to negotiate extensions and things like that. And you sometimes have to go back and say, there's a human being here who we need to look after. We need to make sure they're getting the best that they can get. And yeah, there seems to be that disconnect sometimes between client and lender. And I think that's where a broker is mega, mega important, because they can, although we're employed by the client, we're always going to try and make sure that the lender is looked after as well, to a degree, because we need to look out for both sides. We don't want a lender doing a deal that's going to potentially backfire on them. Likewise, we don't want the client getting into bed with a lender who's going to cause them problems. So we do have to play both sides of the coin. But at the end of the day, the client is the one that we look out for. And I think, it's just remembering that there is a human being there. And also from the brokering perspective, we are human beings as well. I think a lot of clients and lenders forget that we are human beings, and that we have got to put food on the table, and that we have got to look out for the business and everything else. So there's a lot of aspects to look at and check and make sure that everyone's happy with. But that's kind of a bit from every side, I think.
Okay, Michael, thanks for sharing your insights on that and answering those questions. I'll leave the final word with you.
Thank you very much. To everyone who has watched and listened for the last 100 episodes, a massive thank you. To see the support that we get on this podcast is insane. I never thought that I would be doing a podcast around finance and entertaining. I'll use that word loosely. So many people on a podcast all about finance for so many episodes. So thank you very much to everyone that has listened, and hopefully I will catch you on the next 100.